I'm Lauren from Rosy Wednesday Adventures in Vintage Style Sewing, and today I'll be showing you how to machine stitch a lapped zipper for the shift dress sew along. So we're using pattern simplicity 3833. So I'm going to be showing you a slightly different technique for machine stitching a lapped zipper than you might have seen in the past. I learned this in my pattern making class and I was really excited about it because I've struggled with sewing these zippers for a long time. So first I'm going to talk you through what the typical or normal way that I've seen for sewing a machine stitch lap zipper is, so you can see how it looks in the garment that I've sewn versus one where we're using the method I'm going to show you today. So typically what you do is that you will sew from the bottom of the zipper all the way down to the end of the garment, and you'll go ahead and sew that seam, and you leave the two remaining seam, you leave the rest of the seam open above where the zipper is going to be placed. And you take the underlap side, which is going to be stitched right along the edge of the zipper teeth, and you fold it under 1/2 inch and you stitch. And then you take your overlap side, which is going to go all the way over the zipper. You fold it under 5/8 of an inch and then you stitch that down. So this is a circle skirt that I made where I used that method. And you can see down here at the bottom in particular that I've got a little bit of puckering. My lap isn't going completely over the zipper, so I've got a little bit of gaping where I can see zipper teeth. This was not my first machine stitch lap zipper either, so I actually got to the point where after several years of trying it, I gave up and I was hand stitching all my zippers. So the method that I'm going to be showing you today is this one right here. So you can see this is a really nice finish. So I don't have any puckering at the end. I've completely covered the zipper from start to finish. This is the same sewer that's doing it, so it's a great technique that you can use. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to have the center back seam of our dress. So I've got two pieces of fabric here. It's a little bit easier for you to see than if I have the whole back of the garment. And what I've done is I've clean finished the edge with my serger, and then I've also attached stay tape right here. So what stay tape does is it helps keep the fabric from stretching while you're sewing the zipper. So you can see here in my emery dress, I actually have a couple zipper teeth off at the top. So it's about 4 to 5 teeth that are off at the top. So what happened was my fabric stretched on one side while I sewed and I wasn't able to line it up very nice at the end. So this is a great way to prevent that. So one important thing to note about doing this technique is usually at your back zipper you have a 5/8 inch seam allowance. It's actually a lot easier to work with if you use 6/8 of an inch, which is 3/4 of an inch. So we need that little bit of extra 1/8 of an inch of wiggle room, and you'll see why in a little bit when we get to sewing. So now I've cleared off all of my zipper fails, and I'm going to show you a really nice method for doing a machine stitch lap zipper. So on Simplicity 3833, there's a notch that will show you where the end of the zipper is. So we're going to be basting above that notch and then using a regular stitch length below the notch. So if you didn't have a notch, I'll go ahead and show you how you could measure that so you could see where it is. So up at the top of the neck, we're going to have a neck facing. So we've got 5/8 of an inch where we'll be sewing another seam. So I'm going to measure 5/8 of an inch. And then I need an extra 1/8 of an inch so my zipper can zip all the way up. So I'm going to put a pin right there at 6/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to line the top of the zipper stops up with that pin. And then I'll place another pin down here at the bottom of the zipper stop. And that's going to be where I stop my basting stitch. So then we'll just continue pinning all the way down. And we'll be stitching a regular stitch length from the end of the dress all the way up to this pin, and then we'll switch to a basting stitch and do that all the way up to the top of the garment. So now I've taken it to the sewing machine and I'm going to be sewing with a 6/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm starting at the end of the garment, so that means I'm going to be using my regular stitch length to start. So I'll begin stitching and back tack. And then I'm just taking my pins out as I go. Now as we're getting close towards this pin right here, this is the transition point from a regular stitch length to a basting stitch. So I actually want to back tack as I get close up to that point because that's going to be the end of my zipper. And now I'm going to take out that pin and I will change my stitch length up to a basting length, which is a 5 for me on my machine, and sew the seam the rest of the way. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is take this over to the ironing board and press it open. So here I am on my ironing board, and I'm going to press open the seam allowance right here. Okay, so now that we've got this pressed open, we're going to move back to the table and I'll show you how to attach the zipper. So the next thing that I'm going to be doing is stitching the underlapped side of the zipper. So since this is a back zipper, it doesn't really matter where your underlap side is, but if you were to have a zipper that goes on the side of your garment, you would want to make sure that your underlap side is at the back piece. So since it doesn't really matter for us, I'm going to be using this side. So first thing that I'm going to do is take everything but just the seam allowance and flip it to one side. And next I'm going to be attaching my zipper to the seam allowance. You can see here that I don't have the back of my dress there at all, it's just the seam allowance side. So I'm going to be pinning that down, and you want to pin it with your zipper tab in the upwards direction, because when it's in the downwards direction, that's actually locked. So if you have to move your zipper at all while you're sewing, you won't be able to do it. And I'm going to be stitching from the bottom going up. So I want to pin it with my balls of my pins going up towards the top of the garment. So I flipped it on you just then. So now I'm going to be pinning my zipper, and I want my zipper teeth to align with the seam. And I'm going to be starting stitching from the bottom and working up. So I want the balls of my pins to be up at the top. So I'm just checking to make sure my zipper teeth are lined up with the seam as I go. And I'm pinning all along the way. And my zipper tab is in an upward direction to make sure that it's not locked. So the next thing that I'm going to do is take it over to my machine, and I'm going to use a basting stitch. So we want to be basting along the edge of the zipper, and you'll see why that's particularly important here in just a little bit. I have my zipper foot on, so I'm going to put my foot down at the bottom edge, and again I'm using a basting stitch, so it's still on that nice long stitch. And you want to be stitching at the edge of the zipper, so kind of towards my edge of the seam allowance, edge of the zipper, because we're going to be using the fabric in between the zipper teeth and our basting stitch. So I take my pins out as I go. I'll cut that off. And the next thing that we're going to be doing is using the fabric in between the seam line and the zipper teeth. So now I have my zipper basted down to my seam allowance only. So at this point we haven't connected the zipper at all to the back of the dress. So I'm going to take my zipper and flip it over. And you'll see that we have a little fold of fabric here in between the seam allowance line and the edge of the zipper teeth. So what I'm going to be doing is using that fold to create the underlap side of my zipper. So I'm going to take that fold and press it right up against the edge of my zipper teeth and start pinning. And this is where the extra 1/8 of an inch really comes in handy. So I was telling you we're using a 6/8 of an inch seam allowance as opposed to 5/8, because you've got a little bit more of a fold to work with. So I'm just going to pin that down all the way. Okay, so now this is going to be the underlap side of my zipper. So I'm going to be stitching it using my regular stitch length, and this is going to be showing on the outside of my garment. So you want to take care to make sure that the stitch is nice and straight. So again, you see I've folded it. So now I'm going to stitch right along that line, making sure all of your other fabric is out of the way. Move my zipper foot over to the right side. Okay, and this time we're going to be stitching right up along that edge of the zipper teeth. So I back tack to start. And then I'm taking my pins out as I go. And then we just back tack as we get up towards the top. And we pull it off. So you can see here that now I've stitched right along the edge of my zipper teeth on the fold. And if I flip my fabric over to the right side of my garment, you know I've done it correctly when you don't see any stitches on the outside. The next thing that we'll do is stitch the overlap side of our zipper. So we're actually going to be using a 1/2 inch wide tape as our top stitching guide. So what I have here is a 1/2 inch wide blue painter's tape that I have. I actually just used my rotary cutter and a ruler to cut it at exactly 1/2 inch. So we've got our underlap side already stitched. So the side that we're stitching is the one that doesn't have any stitching on it yet. So we'll take our blue painter's tape and line the blue painter's tape up with your seam line. And you want it to match all the way down to the bottom. And you want the end of your blue painter's tape to end just past where your zipper teeth stops. So that's right here. I can just feel the little bump. So I'm going to cut that off right there. So you can see I cut it a little bit crooked, so I'm going to go ahead and fix this because since this is my top stitching guide, I want to make sure that it's nice and straight. So now I have a guide that I can use in order to do my top stitching. So I'm going to go ahead and pin my zipper down to make sure that it stays nice and secure while I'm sewing. I'm also going to check to make sure that my zipper tab is in an upwards direction. It's likely I'm going to have to move it when I'm sewing. So the next thing that I'm going to do is take it back to my machine. I'm going to increase my stitch length just a little bit since this is a top stitch. And I'm going to start at the bottom edge of the zipper. Switch my zipper foot back over to the side that I need. So now what I'm doing is I'm stitching right along the edge of that painter's tape. So I'm going to begin by back tacking. And then when I get to the edge of the painter's tape, I'm going to pivot. So I pivot it all the way back down, get the threads out of the way, and then I'm going to be sewing all the way down the edge of the zipper. I'm following the blue painter's tape as I go. I'm getting towards my zipper tab, so I'm just gonna pick up my presser foot and scooch it down a little bit so make sure that I don't have any wobbly bits in my stitching. And then I'm gonna take the underside of the zipper and make sure that it's still lined up in the same way. There we go. And then at the end, I'm gonna go ahead and back tack and tie off. So now you can take off your painter's tape and you'll see a really nice top stitch lap zipper. So the only thing that we have left to do, so I'm going to go ahead and cut these thread tails right here, is you remember that we had a basting stitch that we had run down the center of the zipper. So now we can go ahead and remove our basting stitches. So this part takes a minute, so we'll go ahead and speed it up, but you'll just be ripping out all of your basting stitches. Okay, So now what you can do is you can take a pair of tweezers or just use your fingers and remove all of the extra threads that you've got there. But you can already see you've got a really nice machine stitched lap zipper, and it definitely covers up the entire zipper, including up at the top at the teeth. And that's it.